the time. We can't just utilize volunteers. This gives us the ability to do that, to rent equipment if necessary. It authorizes us to kind of change our business practices, waive our regular policies for how we conduct business so that we can be more nimble and responsive to the needs of our community. It's a 7-day, but we have the ability to continue it. You won't have to keep re-meeting to continue it. The city manager is authorized to continue it until such time as we deemed the emergency situation past us. It also gives us opportunities to put workplace practices into place that would then guarantee us or open us up for FEMA reimbursement. If we're not in a state of emergency, it's potentially some of the things we do would not be FEMA reimbursable at some point in the future. So this declaration lines us up for appropriate refunding of monies that are spent during this time. And let me make sure, just check anything else. It's one of the things that we can do is change our workplace locations. At some point I'll kind of go through where we are today and what our plan is moving forward, the things that we are considering. It allows us to close city buildings and regular operating hours, conduct our business from home or remotely via Skype, via electronic communications, by telephone, things of that nature.
Let's take care of the declaration first, Mike, and then we'll go through an update on what the city has done in terms of preparation and what we can look forward to, and try to update where the county is and where the state is right now. One of the reasons why we thought this was important to do now is the fluidity of this situation changes every 2 or 3 hours. I'm sure you guys are receiving the same number of calls and messages, people asking, you know, what are we allowed to do right now? And just as soon as I answer the question, an hour later, it's a different answer. But let's do the declaration first. Is there anything else in the declaration that's pertinent?
No, sir. That covers the things that I'm seeing outlined 1 through 10 in the resolution.
So it's a 7-day declaration. The city manager is empowered to roll it over for another 7 days. We will continue to have our commission meetings. At any commission meeting, the commission could vote and override that and say, okay, we think that the emergency is over. So the commission always is empowered. We could call another emergency meeting if we felt like we needed to bring it into it as well. So the commission always has the power, but we don't want to have to keep calling emergency meetings to extend it every 7 days also. With that, are there any other questions about the declaration from the dais? Does the public have any questions about the declaration? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve. I have a motion from Commissioner Norfleet. I have a second from Commissioner Farnsworth. Any questions or comments from the dais on the motion on the floor? Any questions or comments from the public on the motion on the floor? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Now, Mr. Manager, would you take us through what, and the public, through kind of where we are right now, our preparations, and what we could look towards in the upcoming days?
Happy to, Mr. Mayor. I think I'm going to start with what, in an emergency response situation, I think you all are aware, but the feds and FEMA take priority. They're in charge. They delegate through the state of Florida, who delegates to the county, and then cities work under them. So in these types of declared emergencies, we're not as apt to stray away from the county or the state saying this is how it's going to be. We have more autonomy when we're not in an emergency situation. So I say all that to say there's a lot of stuff happening at the federal and the state and the county level that affect us. So this afternoon, the governor of Florida passed an executive order. You have a copy on the dais. It's number 20-68 that puts certain restrictions on bars and nightclubs, beaches, and restaurants. So effective at 5 p.m. today, the biggest one is bars, pubs, and nightclubs. At 5 p.m. today, they'll be shut for 30-day period. Bars, nightclubs, and pubs, and they're defined by operations that derive more than 50% of its gross revenues from the sale of alcoholic beverages. So that's how the state distinguishes between a restaurant that serves alcohol and a bar that maybe serves food. So those are being closed. In addition to that, the governor has directed that at public beaches, gatherings be limited to no more than 10 persons. So you'll remember just at the end of last week, the group size was 1,000. Any groups over 1,000, and we were now thinking that Westfest may be impacted. By the time we made it through the weekend, it was 250. And then yesterday, the president came out and suggested that it should be groups of 10. So the governor followed with this order that said groups of 10 at public beaches, and then there's to be spacing of the parties by at least 6 feet. And I think that's more in response to spring break than anything else. They've had problems with spring break crowds taking the coronavirus threat seriously. The last part of the state's executive order had to do with restaurants. So what the governor said was that restaurants must change their occupancy to 50% of what it was before. So if you had a occupancy of 100, now it's maxed out at 50. And they have to have spacing between the tables of 6 feet in order to continue operating. And then he gave some recommendations about who should be tested. So that's the contents of his order.
And on the restaurants, Mike, that doesn't affect takeout. People can call in and take it away as much as they want.
That is correct. So then the county followed up with that and took some of the governor's recommendations and put them into local law. So this is a law that affects all of Alachua County. It was passed earlier this afternoon. It's emergency order 2020-02. You also have copies of this. So they took what they were anticipating was a recommendation from the governor on restaurants. They anticipated that it was a recommendation, and they decided we're going to take all of his recommendations and put them into this emergency order as local law. And they also indicated, I spoke to the county manager, that the governor anticipated this. His thought was that where he was placing recommendations was there's 67 counties and 420 cities. Each one, it might be a little bit different. Like if there are no known cases of coronavirus in your county or community, you may not take the strictest form of this regulation, and he named a county that had nothing going on and suggested they may not do this, it may stay a recommendation. Whereas Miami-Dade County, which has the greatest number of cases, probably will take these recommendations and maybe even strengthen them. So that was the cue for Alachua County to say, okay, we're somewhere in the middle, so we're going to write into law what we think is applicable for our county. So their law says on the restaurants, and they defined it as public assembly, and that's indoor and outdoor, with a limited occupancy of either 50 individuals or 50% of permitted occupancy load, whichever is less. So you shouldn't, anywhere in Alachua County, and this applies county-wide, so within municipalities too, there should be no public gathering places where the attendance is higher than 50, and if their load occupancy rating is less than 100, it would be less than that. And some examples are houses of worship, places of entertainment like movie theaters, restaurants, waiting transportation, and they excluded what they consider to be essential services, pharmacies, grocery stores, hardware stores, etc. They also are limiting the sale of food and beverages to between the hours of 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. And spacing of tables at 6 feet. So, and that seating parties are prohibited to exceed 10. Seating at bars and restaurants is prohibited. So the county took it a step further. This applies to everything in Newberry. The final part of the counties has to do with who gets testing. It's an employee screening program. So we are mandated for employers that meet these criteria. It's at restaurants. So any restaurant has to screen their employees on a daily basis in an A, B, C, D, E fashion. And so that concludes the executive orders that we're operating under. We have 15 days to spread to slow the spread of coronavirus. Sorry about that. This is from the president, and this was the basis for both the governor's order and the county's order. And then just finally a report on what the county is doing, and I'll just briefly kind of go through what the county is doing and how it relates to what we're putting in place here at the city of Newberry. The county is asking all non-essential employees to work from home. So no one is being sent home without pay. They're being sent home to work from home, realizing that it may be difficult for every employee to work at the same capacity that they could, but it enables them to not have to deal with things about some folks are being home. Do they get paid or not? They're being asked to do something. They're absolutely being asked to be available during regular working hours, from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. If you're at home, you're expected to be working, although there's maybe not such tight scrutiny over that, but you are absolutely expected to be available. And where they've closed all the county facilities, but where they do have some facilities that they have critical staffing needs, so they are, rather than have all of staff show up, they are scheduling so that they may have 2 in for a 4-hour shift, 2 more in for another 4-hour shift, and then 2 more in for another 4-hour shift. They're trying to minimize the number of people that are at any of their places. One thing that's unique about the county that we don't have as much of a challenge, the county has several places of employment where you would have 75 to 150 employees in the same building, plus the public. We don't have that problem. Our most densely populated areas are Easton. When the public's there. When the public's not there, we maybe have 15 employees max at any time. Fire department and our public works compound. So the county's essential employees that are staying at work are their fire personnel and their public works personnel. The theory behind public works personnel is they work outside and they really have very little contact with the general public. Their crew sizes are small.
Mike, can we shift into what Newberry's doing? Because I think that's what our residents want to know about. What if it relates to we're emulating, great, but let's tell folks things like we're leaving our parks, open air parks open, but we're sanitizing them twice a day, 7 days a week, those kind of things. I think that's what folks at home are waiting for.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Mayor. Well, we haven't finalized a complete plan yet. We, effective today, closed all city buildings to the public. City Hall is open through the drive-through, so if you want to come through, we're also available through telephone or electronic mail, email types of things. The building department has been open, so because we felt like that closing the building department would be potentially closing an entire industry within our town, and construction's kind of a happening thing for us. So currently the building department is really the only operating area that's open. Easton is closed to regular guests, but the daycare operation, the after-school care operation that we operate from there, remains open. We've been talking regularly with the CDC and the Department of Children and Families who regulate us on that, expecting that they would close it because the congregation of people exceeded all of these recommendations. We got some clarity today that they want to try to keep daycares open as much as possible because first responders, people that need to be at work, both from fire and police, but also in the medical industry, hospitals, nurses, doctors, technicians, if they don't have a place for their children to be watched after, then they're not going to be able to work. And so right now, at a national level, a state level, and locally, they're encouraging daycares to stay open and implement best practices for keeping the place sanitary. All of the facilities at our parks are closed, the indoor portion of the facilities, with the exception of restrooms, and outdoor parks are also open. So we have crews set up to go through and sanitize the restrooms and also sanitize the park equipment to the extent that we can. We're experiencing the same shortage on disinfecting materials as everyone else. There's a local contractor that actually was planning to do some cleaning on the city of Newberry's recreation equipment prior to coronavirus that we're trying to get in touch with. But we anticipate that they're going to experience the same shortage on disinfecting materials as we are. But so we've got staff that are going to continue to do that, and we're going to do that 7 days a week, keeping our bathrooms disinfected and our play equipment disinfected so long as we have the ability to do that.
And we would certainly encourage parents who want to take their kids to the playground, if they've got wipes and things like that, to bring that material with them and, you know, clean up behind themselves or clean up before, if that makes them feel more comfortable.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And as the mayor said, this is super fluid, and we probably aren't too far out in front of anything. We're generally watching what the rest of the world does because they have expertise in this. We're listening to the medical community, and then we're seeing how it fits our community and responding. So I anticipate that by next week we will probably follow the president's and the governor's guidelines of trying to get as many people working from home as possible. Our department heads are working on that for the next 2 days. I anticipate that on Monday we're going to come up with some work from home program that fits for Newberry.
And I've been able to speak to most of you. You know, I sat down with the clerk for a few hours. We are going to continue moving forward with our elections this year. They're April 14th. Though we are highly encouraging people to vote by mail. They can come through the drive-through and fill out a form, just show their ID, and the city clerk can help them get a ballot so that they can then mail that in. If you are disabled, you can't get to the drive-through, there is a procedure where you can call the city clerk's office and have your ballot mailed to you. You'll need to call the city clerk and give me the direct line again. It's 472-2446 to get that mailed out to you. I want to thank the candidates who have said they've agreed not to go door to door, not to host meet and greets, to try to limit that. The other candidates are still working out how they're going to handle that. I know that they're going to do whatever they need to do to make sure that everybody feels comfortable and safe with limiting those social exposures. So those are what the city's doing. The elections are marching on. When we had the municipal building on April 14th from 7 to 7, we're going to have a waiting area outside. The line will be outside so that we're not clustering people inside the municipal building. We'll make sure the tables are more than 6 feet apart, and the voting machines themselves are more than 6 feet apart. We'll have hand sanitizer all over the place. We'll do what we can to make sure that everybody feels comfortable and safe coming down and casting their vote, but you can certainly take care of the whole thing by mailing it in and not having to come there that day. Is there any other announcements that we need to make tonight?
One thing I haven't touched on, Mr. Mayor, is city commission meetings. We do not have an opportunity to preclude the public from attending city commission meetings. We could encourage them, and we did for this meeting, to attend electronically. We also think that because we are on the very front end of this, that we scheduled next Monday night's meeting and we plan to conduct it. We're going to try to get all critical business done, and then we are going to try to go down to a minimum of 1 per month, business depending. So we'll keep you opposed. If there's something critical that we can't avoid, then we would have both meetings a month. But we're going to try to schedule, push as many items as we can back, and only meet when there's a critical item that we can't get around and we don't see any other way to handle it. So, so my expectation is that moving into after this meeting, the meeting frequency for the city commission is going to decrease at least by half.
And I've asked for everything that's not essential to be taken off the agendas so that we can keep them short and sweet, so we won't have any proclamations for the cheerleaders or the volleyball team, or we're asking them all to come here. But with the election right in front of us, we are going to need to postpone West Fest, find a new date. I've asked the concerned citizens, and they've agreed to postpone their April 4th soil ceremony. And I've asked the opioid task force, and they've agreed to postpone their April 25th walkathon. So we'll be looking for a whole lot of new dates here coming up soon. but, you know, it's important to lead by example, and it's hard to ask everybody else to not gather and then ask them to come to these other events. Does the commission have any thoughts? Commissioner McKinley?
Just for information purposes for the city, I have been entertaining a few pastors' comments and questions for me, and there are a number of churches already in our city, including ours, that are just moving to online services for this time, and we're encouraging churches to do that. And so I just want you to be aware that we're trying our best to eliminate those crowds in our city. So if you have any input, if you need me to get a message out to any of our pastors, I'll be more than happy to communicate that for you. So just let me know.
Thank you for doing that. Mr. Manager, do you have any?
The one thought that I would offer is that up until 3 o'clock this afternoon, that was a recommendation. Now the county says that's a mandate, just to make
Yes.
sure there's some clarity among those people
Yes.
that are making those decisions.
Some are happy to oblige, and
I understand.
others we're convincing. So
I understand.
yeah.
And, Mr. Mayor, we have 2 community feeding programs that the city doesn't operate, but we host. One is elder care, and we are continuing or allowing the entities that provide that service to continue, but we're not going to host it as a sit-down and eat. If you want to do it as a takeout, carry-out, we've encouraged them to continue just based on the information we're seeing from the CDC. That's the right thing to do. So if those organizations care to continue those operations, we're encouraging them to do so.
And the Methodist Church has discontinued theirs, so they won't be setting up for at least the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
The high school is handing out, there's a station there that's there from 11 to 1, and you can go there and you can pick up lunch for that day and breakfast for the next day. And then you can come back the next day and pick up. If a community member wants to pick them up and deliver, that's perfectly fine. If you're doing that for more than 10, they ask that you call the school ahead of time. It's 472-1101, but there's no problem at all. Just say, I'm going to deliver these to 10 kids, 12 kids. They'll have them prepared for you and ready to go. My only last comment would be, just pollen, I swear. My only last comment would be, you know, all of these preparations are good and they're right and they're the right thing to do. But panicking never helps. We do have local businesses that need to stay open because they're providing hand sanitizer and gasoline and groceries and those kinds of things. I'd ask that you still, in as responsible way as you can, support those local businesses. If the business has to shut down but has an online option, please consider using it. Any way that we can to continue to support the local economy and show those businesses that we appreciate them putting the public health and safety above their own profit is great, but we also want to make sure that they are able to reopen when this whole thing calms down. Commissioner Farnsworth, did you
I do have
a
one question. Pastor just reminded me of this. With all these regulations and limits as to how many people can get together or go to a restaurant or anything, who is actually going to enforce all of that?
Good question. I would say that's going to be the county, right?
I
ASO?
I believe the enforcement will come at a county or at a higher level, depending on who set the rule. There's been no request or expectation that Newberry would be policing or enforcing these regulations. I think it's probably fair for us to be an advisor from time to time, because the way this is coming out, you'd have to expect that some percentage of our population might not be aware, but that's the extent. We're not going to be the police that runs in and say, no, you can't do that, or you have to close at a certain time. It's not our role.
It is not our role. Any other questions or comments from the dais? Does the public have any questions or comments? Hearing none, if there's no further business, Madam Clerk. They can't. I have. Let's finish the question, then I'll make sure I'm answering the right thing. Yes, in lieu of what I have offered to all the candidates, since they have volunteered not to go knocking on doors and hosting these meet and greets, is that I will give them extended time at a commission meeting to make their case, so they can introduce themselves and give their platform. I've also offered to sit down one-on-one with them and ask them some questions and do a Facebook Live event on my Facebook page so that can get them some more exposure. I'll try to collect some questions from residents and a couple of other things that are more virtual than anything else. We will have the election debates. I'm not going to ask student government to run those debates at this time. So we'll handle it the same way we've always done. Each candidate will submit the questions that they want to ask. They want the moderator to ask their opponent. I'll be the moderator. It'll be closed to the public, but it will be video. It'll be broadcast live on YouTube, and then they'll be able to pull those videos off and show clips of it on their own social media pages or websites or whatever. That will mean that we'll have 2 candidates in here at one time, myself, and 1 or 2 staff working the camera. So we'll try to limit it as much as we can. So that's how we are progressing and moving forward when it comes to the candidates. So look for them to be scheduled on the next meeting, and we may have to break them up, do 2 now and 2 later. We'll see what their schedule will allow. But if you have, all of these folks are on Facebook. So if you have questions, you have in group 2, you have Mark Clark and Joy Glanzer. In group 3, you have the incumbent Monty Farnsworth, and you have the challenger Walt Boyer. Their cell phones are out there. Their Facebooks are out there. Take the initiative and send them questions on Facebook and have them answer you that way. It's a lot safer right now than asking them to come over and sit on your front porch. Was that? I should have come over. Any questions from staff or the attorney? Any comments then? Did we get it all, Madam Clerk? Okay. Any, Commissioner Coleman?
I was just wanting to know if Monty had secured the airplane and banner yet.
He has. I think it's going to be flying over today.
Okay.
All right. There are no more questions or comments from the dais. Nothing left from the public. We are adjourned.